I was born far from here on the right coast. I was my parents' firstborn, my grandparents' firstborn, our diaspora's firstborn. I was born to the kind of mother whose sacrifices you don't understand when you're young. The kind of person that does so much on so little with so few words that you never really think about sacrifice at all. She was the firstborn of her parents too, the first to get sent west, the one who brought her 3 sisters with her, who made a home for them in a foreign land, who raised them like a parent while absent of her own. See, in her culture, the eldest was the sacrifice, an intermediary between generations, the parentified child who gave without question. My Baba's story would look similar on paper, but it was starkly different. His brilliant parents, who knew themselves to be brilliant, gave birth to brilliant sons and daughters who in turn knew themselves to be brilliant. He was the first of his parents too, but he wasn't the intermediary. He was the shield. See, his dad beat his ass. Brilliance is a way of intoxicating people, and there's little room for shared power with people drunk on themselves. Baba never talked about it, but his siblings told me. The abuse was often in front of an audience, like pack animals asserting dominance, so there was no mistake who the strongest was. My Baba never beat my ass, but he did beat the shit out of my soul, though. His abuse came out of his mouth, and there was never any mistake who the strongest was. What my dad took from his dad was that he's the kind of guy that's always right. And smart as he was right often enough that it was difficult to get around. That isn't his whole story. His heart burns with a fury against injustice that makes people love him and want to fight alongside him. His siblings are all like that. The definition of unrelenting duty, discipline, rigidity, and the enactment of sheer will. Also, there was compassion for the human condition, if not for certain humans. He would do anything for just about anyone, and despite everything, he was never too much of a hard ass that we didn't know he loved us. I remember nights in our basement, my parents' comrades and friends spread around, tea and whiskey flowing all night, politicking. I grew up crawling around under a coffee table littered with self-published rags, screaming liberation in this country and theirs. I remember at a certain point of the night, the low hum of voices we could hear started to vibrate a little louder, until there was one louder than the rest, unmistakably my Baba's. Contempt oozing thick enough you could see the snarl in his face from 2 floors away. And I could hear the slow procession of padded feet coming up the stairs, a pair or 2 at a time, escaping out the door, until there was silence. I heard my mom tell him once that side of him made people wish up was down just so they could prove him wrong. No one was more right than he was. No one was good enough. Not his peers, not his kids, not my mother, not his girlfriend, not his muse, not his second wife, not his third wife, not his fourth wife. When I was 12, my mom took me and my brother out to dinner at our favorite diner. We could tell she was agitated. She never could keep it a secret. You could see her whole heart through her eyes. None of us ate, really. We were old enough to feel a storm brewing, young enough not to know it. I have something to tell you guys. We're moving to St. Louis. Your dad isn't coming with us. Time stopped. Someone turned the volume down on all the sounds around us. And that deafening silence was... And that deafening silence was shredded by heart-rending, veil-piercing wailing from 2 destroyed throats. It was an impossible amount of information to process in a moment. My whole world, which had never really had a shape, all of a sudden took on a sense of finite scale and shattered. I didn't know I had a life to lose until I had to lose it. I never had a father, not in practice really, until I lost him. I asked my mom some years later, what could possibly be bad enough to have to do this? You don't know the things he said to me, she said. What he did to humiliate me, how small he made me feel, how he needed to make me feel small. How can anyone make you feel small, I thought? You're omnipresent. How could anyone want to? You are love incarnate. When I was 16, my dad's next oldest brother died. He was a beacon of love and righteousness in a revolutionary movement continents away. He left behind his wife and my 3 young cousins. A year later, I traveled to Toronto to my grandmother's house for his memorial. Before I left home, my mom pulled me aside and said that it was only the second time since they'd left Iran decades ago that my dad and his siblings had been in the same place at the same time. She told me that if they ever went out in public together, that I was not to go with them, that there were forces in the world that wished them harm, forces with the reach to do something about it, and that all of them together would be the perfect opportunity for catastrophe. It was then that the realities of what I heard every night in our basement became clear. That epiphany quickly followed by a deepening realization of the inherent contradictions between practicing liberation out in the world, but not practicing it at home. Of being brilliant enough to build movements against injustice, but ignorant enough to think that brilliance can excuse harm. I told myself I'd never be that way, but lessons are learned differently when they're on the receiving end of an experience. Causing harm, though, that sears a lesson into your soul. My wife and I split up 6 months ago. For the first couple months, we only talked an hour a week during therapy, and the rest of the time we moved around the same house like ghosts who couldn't see each other. We love each other very deeply, but she said once that we've had more unhappy years than happy ones, and I couldn't disagree. Lots of things didn't work out the way we hoped. Lots of ways I acted that became clearer to me the more I thought about my Baba. I've done many things in life according to my beliefs, lines I've held, battles won, and lessons learned from battles lost. But, I've also made challenging decisions to hold on to things that should have been let go, believing in the greater good instead of the individual harm. I've chosen to make decisions on behalf of others without their participation. I've taken action without consensus, without even asking for an opinion. And I lived my life as if it was the only one that mattered. All the while I said to myself, and I said to her, I'm doing this for the good of all of us. I'm doing this for the sake of our family, for the families of the people we love. But it was me alone that decided that what I was doing was the best thing for all of us. How can you not see, I would ask her. How can you not love me for what I'm accomplishing? Live this life, I demanded. Live these values with me. Fight this fight with me. What better way is there? There can't possibly be one. We were hurting for so long that I started to attach it to her. Every ounce of hurt I felt in my heart must have come from her. It fermented in my gut, making me drunk on my own bitterness, all the while not realizing I had made a promise I wasn't keeping. A promise of safety, a promise of love, a promise of peace. I told her she was wrong, that she was fickle, that she couldn't see the way. The truth is, I was the one who lost my way. And once again, I lost a version of my life I didn't appreciate in the moment. I found myself begging for forgiveness too late instead of for permission. I realized I was ignoring the lessons my father laid out for me so plainly that this presupposed moral high ground does not give me the right to live a set of values out in the world, but not at home. I was a father making his father's mistakes, not valuing the people closest to me. See, my lesson to learn was that living your values starts with honoring the ones most affected by them. And I'm honored by a lesson my wife is teaching me now, that her forgiveness is stronger than her husband's foolishness. Thank you.